My brother called me selfish at his own wedding. In front of 200 people with champagne still fizzing in their glasses, he pointed at me across the reception hall and said I was the reason our family was falling apart. What he didn't tell anyone, what he'd been hiding for 3 years, was that he'd already taken nearly $400,000 using my name, and he was about to try for more. Let me back up. My name is Kelsey, and until 18 months ago, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. I'm 32. I own a small interior design studio in Austin that I built from nothing. We're talking from my apartment living room with a secondhand laptop and one client who was my college roommate's mother. I worked every weekend for 6 years. I skipped vacations. I ate a lot of sad desk lunches. But by the time my brother got engaged, my studio had a team of 4, a lease on an actual office space, and a client list I was genuinely proud of. My brother. I'll call him my brother because that's what he was, or at least what I thought he was, is 3 years older than me. He's always been the one our parents talked about at dinner, the one who got the good grades, the good job, the good girlfriend who eventually became the woman he was marrying. I was the afterthought, the one who took a risk with the design thing, who didn't settle down, who our mother sometimes looked at with this polite, worried smile, like I was a puzzle she hadn't quite solved yet. I don't say any of this with bitterness anymore. I'm past that, but you need to understand the dynamic, because it matters for everything that comes after. The wedding was in April. Asheville, North Carolina. His wife's idea, all exposed wood beams and string lights and mountain views. It was genuinely beautiful. I'd even helped them pick the venue coordinator, because that's the kind of person I was back then. The kind who helps without being asked and never thinks to wonder why she's always the one helping. I flew in 2 days early. My brother had asked me to be there to help with some last-minute setup, which, again, I said yes to without hesitating. I stayed in a hotel near the venue instead of with our parents. I'd learned a long time ago that too much family in close quarters was a recipe for me losing my mind. The first sign that something was off came on Friday afternoon. I was in the venue's back office with the coordinator, going over the floral delivery schedule, when my phone lit up with a notification from my business banking app. I almost ignored it. I was in the middle of a conversation. But something made me glance down. It was an alert about a new authorized user added to my business credit line. I frowned. I hadn't done that. I excused myself from the coordinator and stepped into the hallway, pulling up the notification. The name on the new authorized user account was one I recognized immediately, but not because I'd added it. It was the name of a real estate LLC I'd never heard of. But the address listed in the account details, I knew that address. It was my brother's new apartment building. I stood there in that hallway for a long moment, the sound of caterers moving equipment somewhere above me, trying to figure out if I was reading it wrong. I wasn't. I called my bank. I sat on hold for 11 minutes in a storage room surrounded by folded tablecloths, and when I finally got through to someone, what they told me made my throat close. There was an account linked to my business credit line that I hadn't opened. The LLC, registered in my brother's wife's maiden name, had been added as an authorized entity 4 months earlier. The paperwork had my signature on it, except I hadn't signed anything. The woman on the phone kept asking if I wanted to dispute the account, and I kept saying yes, yes, of course. But my brain was running a parallel track trying to do math I didn't want to do. 4 months. The LLC. The address. The signature I hadn't written. I hung up and sat very still for a minute. Then I did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I opened the Notes app on my phone and started writing down every single thing I knew. I didn't confront him that night. I know some people reading this are already shaking their heads. Why didn't you say something? Why did you say something? Here's the thing. I needed to know how much there was. If I walked up to my brother the night before his wedding and accused him of fraud without knowing what I was actually dealing with, he would deny it, the weekend would explode, and I would end up looking like the unstable sister who ruined everything. I had seen how that family worked my entire life. I knew how the story would get told. So I stayed quiet, and I kept gathering. That night, after dinner, I slipped out and sat in my rental car in the parking lot of the hotel for 2 hours on the phone with my accountant. She's been with me since year 2 of the business. Sharp, no nonsense, the kind of woman who doesn't panic and doesn't waste words. I walked her through everything I'd found. She pulled up the accounts from her end while I had mine open. And what we found together was worse than I'd expected. The credit mine account was one thing, but there was also a loan, a business loan in my company's name, $380,000 taken out 11 months ago, secured using my studio's assets as collateral. The loan had been serviced, meaning payments had been made, but the payments were coming from an account I didn't recognize, and the loan itself was structured in a way that put my company on the hook the moment those payments stopped. My accountant was very quiet for a moment after she finished reading the figures to me. Then she said, "Kelsey, this is financial fraud. This isn't a misunderstanding." I already knew that, but hearing it out loud in the parking lot of a hotel in Asheville the night before my brother's wedding was something else entirely. I didn't sleep. I lay in the hotel bed watching the ceiling and running through every interaction I'd had with my brother over the past year, picking through the details like someone searching through wreckage. The time he'd asked me if he could borrow some paperwork for a rental application, I'd said yes, thought nothing of it. The time he called asking about my business structure, said he was thinking of starting something of his own, asked questions I'd answered openly because he was my brother. The time his wife mentioned casually that they were looking at some investment opportunities, I had handed them the information. I just hadn't known what they were going to do with it. The wedding ceremony was at 2 o'clock. I stood in the back row of the venue's outdoor space and watched my brother cry when he saw his wife walking toward him, and I thought, he's good at this. He's very good at looking like the person you think he is. The reception was where it fell apart, not because of me. I want to be clear about that. I was sitting at my table eating salmon I barely tasted when my brother's wife came over and sat down next to me. She had a look on her face I can only describe as calculated warmth, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. She said she was so glad I was there. She said she'd been meaning to talk to me about something. She said my brother had been looking into a business opportunity that he thought I might want to be part of, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we could grow something together as a family? I looked at her. What kind of opportunity? She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. I unfolded it. It was a summary, one page, printed, clearly prepared in advance of a real estate investment venture. The projected returns were absurd. The structure was exactly the kind of thing that would require me to sign my business assets over as a guarantee. I refolded the paper. I looked at her. I said, "Did my brother put this together?" She smiled. "We both did. As a surprise." That's when he walked over. My brother, in his wedding tuxedo, champagne in hand, standing at his own reception, presenting me with a document he wanted me to sign. I set the paper on the table. "No." That was it. That was all I said. But something in my tone must have landed differently than expected, because his smile flickered. "You don't even want to hear about it." "I've already heard enough. We'll talk about it next week." What happened next was not my doing. I want to be extremely clear about this. I said no. I said we'd talk later, and I started to push back my chair. That was it. But my brother, the man who had just married the woman of his dreams in front of 200 people, grabbed my arm. "Kelsey, don't be like this." I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at him. Like what? And that's when he started. I've replayed it so many times since that the edges have gotten a little worn, but the substance is still sharp. He stood up in front of our relatives, our parents, his new wife's family, and he said that I had always been selfish, that I'd made my money and built my walls and forgotten about the people who supported me. That family was supposed to take care of each other. That he had always been there for me. Which was so far from accurate that I almost laughed, and that he was just asking me to return the favor. Our mother put her hand over her mouth. Our dad looked at the floor. People were staring. I stood up. I kept my voice level. "I found the loan, Marcus. I used his name. I know I said I wouldn't use name. I know I said I wouldn't use names, but in that moment I used his name because I needed him to understand I wasn't bluffing." He went very still. "I found the accounts," I said. "I found the LLC. I've already talked to my bank and my accountant. So before you finish this speech about what a selfish sister I am, you might want to think about what happens next." The room was so quiet I could hear the string quartet in the corner stop playing. He said, "You're making a scene. You made the scene, I said. I'm just making sure everyone has the right information. I picked up my clutch and walked out of the reception. My heels on the hardwood floor were the loudest sound in the room. My phone started ringing before I reached the parking lot. My mother, then my dad, then an unknown number that I later figured out was my brother's new mother-in-law. I didn't answer any of them. I sat in my rental car, hands on the steering wheel, and I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to feel everything: the anger, the grief, the strange, hollow feeling of watching something you thought was real turn out to be hollow. Then I pulled up my accountant's number and texted her. We're moving forward. All of it. The next week was the ugliest week of my life, and I have had some genuinely ugly weeks. My brother called 17 times. My mother sent me a series of texts that started with, "Please just talk to him," and escalated to, "You are destroying this family." My sister-in-law posted something on her social media that she didn't tag me in, but that enough mutual acquaintances screenshotted and sent to me that I got the message. A long, weepy post about how money changes people, how she just wanted a family to belong to, how some people forget where they came from the minute they get successful. It had thousands of likes by the end of the day. My name wasn't in it. It didn't need to be. I had a choice at that point. I could stay quiet and let it roll off me, which is what I would have done 2 years ago. Or I could do something. I called my attorney. She specializes in business fraud. I'd used her once before for a contract dispute that turned out to be nothing, but I remembered that she had a quality I needed right then, which was that she did not get rattled. I walked her through everything. She was quiet for a long time, the same way my accountant had been. And then she said, "How long has this been going on?" "At least 11 months that I can document." "And the signature on the loan paperwork?" "Not mine." Another pause. Then, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." What we did was build a case, carefully, methodically, without any of the emotion that was coursing through me every time my phone lit up with another message from my mother. My attorney filed a fraud report with the bank. The bank launched their own investigation. We got the loan documents subpoenaed. The signature forensics came back in 3 weeks. The signature on the original loan agreement was a forgery. In the meantime, my brother and his wife had not been quiet. They called my parents daily. They told them I was vindictive, that I was trying to destroy them out of jealousy, that the loan was something I had agreed to verbally and then backed out of because I was threatened by their success. My parents, to their credit, did not immediately believe this, but they were frightened. My mother called me one evening and she sounded the way she used to when I was a teenager, and she thought I was going to do something impulsive. "Maybe there's a way to handle this quietly," she said. "Without the lawyers. Without all of this." I loved my mother. I still do. But I said, "Mom, he forged my signature to take out a $380,000 loan using my company as collateral. There is no quiet version of this." She cried. I held the phone and let her cry because I understood. She was losing something too, and what she was losing wasn't her fault. But I couldn't undo what I was doing. I couldn't set down the evidence to make her feel better. That wasn't something I was willing to do. The investigation took 6 months. 6 months of my attorney sending updates and calm, clipped emails. 6 months of my brother's calls going from angry to pleading to silent. 6 months of my mother being caught between two versions of events and not knowing which one to believe. The bank's findings were definitive. The forgery was confirmed. The LLC, which had by that point been used to purchase a property, using the loan proceeds, was frozen. My brother and his wife were given the option of cooperating with law enforcement or not. They chose to cooperate, which reduced their exposure, but it did not eliminate it. He didn't go to prison. I want to be honest about that. The plea arrangement meant no jail time. Financial fraud involving family members is complicated, particularly when the alleged perpetrator has no prior record and the evidence, while clear, is circumstantial in some of its earlier stages. What he did get, a civil judgment against him, the property seized and sold, a permanent mark on his financial record, and the end of the career he'd spent 15 years building. His employer let him go quietly. His new wife filed for divorce 8 months after the wedding. I am not happy about any of that. I want to be clear, because I think people expect me to say I felt satisfied or vindicated. I didn't. I felt tired. I felt the particular exhaustion of being right when you desperately wished you were wrong. My mother and I didn't speak for 4 months after the judgment came through. Then one evening she called, and this time she wasn't crying. She just said, "I owe you an apology." We talked for 2 hours. I don't know that we'll ever be fully back to what we were, but we're something. We talk every Sunday. She doesn't bring up my brother. I don't either. He sent me an email 8 months after the divorce. I read it once. It said he was sorry, that he'd been under financial pressure I didn't know about, that his wife had pushed the idea and he hadn't known how to say no, that he never meant for it to go this far. I don't know how much of that is true. I don't know how much of that is true. I don't know if it matters. I didn't reply. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. The people who love you for what you can give them will always find a way to take it if you let them believe it's available. I spent 32 years being the family member who said yes, yes to helping, yes to showing up, yes to lending out my knowledge and my credit and my goodwill without asking what it was for. And for a long time, I thought that was just what love looked like. The constant giving without keeping score. But there's a difference between choosing to give and having it taken from you. There's a difference between family and obligation. And there's a difference between loyalty and letting someone use your name on a loan you didn't sign. I built my business alone, not because no one helped me, my accountant helped me, my attorney helped me, the college roommate's mother who gave me my first project helped me, but I built it with people who showed up honestly, who said what they needed and what they were offering in return. That's what real support looks like. Not a document slid across a table at a wedding reception. I'm still in Austin. The studio is bigger now. We picked up 2 new commercial clients in the past year, and I hired a 5th person in January. I took an actual vacation last summer for the first time in 4 years. I have a therapist I see every other week, and a dog named after a French pastry who sits on my feet when I work from home. My life is quiet in a way it wasn't before, and I have learned, I am still learning, that quiet is not emptiness. Sometimes quiet is just what peace sounds like when you finally stop trying to hold things together that were never yours to hold. If you're watching this right now and something I said sounds familiar, if you've been the one who always helps, the one who always shows up, the one who somehow ends up holding the bag, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to protect what you built. You are not obligated to set your own house on fire because someone else forgot to bring matches. I didn't ruin my family. My brother made his choices, and those choices had consequences, and I simply stopped pretending otherwise. That's not cruelty. That's just finally deciding that I matter too. So tell me, have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit close to home, hit subscribe. Because I have more, and none of them have easy endings. But all of them are true. I've thought a lot about how things unfolded, not just what my brother did, but how it was possible for it to go on as long as it did. And the honest answer, the one I don't love admitting, is that I made it easier than I should have. Not because I was stupid, because I was trusting in a way that I mistook for virtue. There's a version of generosity that is genuinely good, the kind where you give because you have enough and someone else doesn't, and the giving costs you something real, and you do it anyway. That kind of generosity I still believe in, but there's another version that I was living, where I said yes to everything because I was afraid of what no would cost me. Afraid of being seen as difficult. Afraid of being the one who didn't show up. That version isn't generosity. It's just fear, dressed up in nicer clothes. My brother understood that about me before I did. He knew I would answer questions about my business structure because I wanted to be helpful. He knew I wouldn't scrutinize the paperwork because scrutinizing felt unfamily-like. He counted on me being exactly who I had always been, and for 11 months, I was. What changed wasn't some sudden burst of courage. It was a notification on my phone in the back office of a wedding venue. It was 11 minutes on hold. It was sitting in a rental car in the dark, running numbers I didn't want to run. Intelligence, real intelligence, isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being willing to look at what's in front of you even when you'd rather not. I looked, and once I looked, I couldn't unsee it. The hardest part wasn't the legal process. It wasn't the 6 months of waiting or the calls I didn't return or even the 4 months my mother and I didn't speak. The hardest part was accepting that I had to keep going even when keeping going felt like the cruelest option. My sister-in-law's post went viral in our corner of the internet. My extended family had opinions. There were a few weeks where I genuinely wondered if I was the problem, if I was the one making everything harder than it needed to be. But I kept coming back to something simple. He forged my name. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not a gray area. That's a choice someone made, deliberately, over many months, banking on my silence. And so I had to make a choice too. I could protect the peace, or I could protect what I'd built. Not just the business, but the version of myself that had worked nights and weekends for 6 years to build it. Those two things turned out to be mutually exclusive. And that is not something I caused. That is just the reality my brother created. What I know now is that integrity costs something every single time. It cost me my brother. It cost me months with my mother. It cost me a version of my family that I had been quietly maintaining for years through sheer willingness to overlook things. None of that is small. But the alternative? Staying quiet? Signing what they put in front of me? Becoming smaller so that other people could take up more space? That would have cost me something I wasn't willing to give. You only get one life as yourself. That sounds obvious until the moment you're actually being asked to trade it in.